Welcome to WEFTEC Now. I'm Travis Loop with the Water Environment Federation. I am here with Reverend Larry Bullock, also President and CEO of the U.S. Minority Contractors Association. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm really glad to sit down and talk with you. There's a lot of conversation in the water sector right now about diversity and the need to increase diversity. And the word is used a lot. And I'd like to get your explanation of what diversity means.
Okay. Well, diversity is basically people who are historically been excluded from an industry, either because of sex, race, gender, ethnicity, or in some cases, physical disabilities, and persons who maybe have different points of view about the industry. So in that sense, we're talking about diversity plus inclusion, because diversity without inclusion is a hollow sound. And so my remarks today before the panel was to encourage them to think beyond paradigms, to encourage them to look at the return on investment from diversity and inclusion in the water environmental industry, in the water and water waste treatment industry, from the manufacturers of the equipment to the policymakers at the policy level, certainly those who must engage the community to say that you need to reflect the demographics of the area that you seek to serve. So a generic definition is that diversity and inclusion means exactly what it says. We must make sure we're not all looking alike, sounding alike, having the same values. And inclusion is that we welcome those voices into the conversation.
I'm glad you're elaborating on inclusion, because folks say that diversity without inclusion is just playing a numbers game. You're just trying to kind of change the numbers there. So could you build on what inclusion means?
Okay. Well, inclusion basically says we don't just check the box and fulfill some artificial quota or meet some artificial barriers that have been set up, but that in the real world, that, as I said, the former Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown, says that if we go to China, to talk to China from America, we ought to have some Chinese Americans as a part of delegation. If we go to Africa and meeting with the African leaders, we should make sure we have some African Americans as a part of the delegation, included delegation. If we go to Mexico, we should have some Mexican Americans in part of the delegation. That includes people who historically have been locked out. If you go to India, you must have some Indian Americans in part of that delegation. Why? First of all, because it's the right thing to do, because we live in a multicultural society here in America. But secondly, it speaks volumes to your audience when they can see for themselves that diversity with inclusion.
And so that would also apply to the water workforce, to a utility or to a water company. They have their customers. Let's say it's a utility. They're in a community, and the community would appreciate and value seeing themselves in that workforce, that utility.
And you establish credibility, both for your product as well as for the service that you are providing. Because if it is a public utility, the operative word there is public, you are dependent upon the tax base. You are dependent upon the revenue that comes to you from that demographic, from that constituency. And that constituency expects to see itself in the operation.
Sure. How else does having a more diverse workforce, a more inclusive workforce benefit the water sector, or really, any kind of sector? But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I gave an example this morning in my speech to the Flint water situation. And I said that if I were a part of that administration in Flint, and my relatives and my friends, the people I go to church with, were dying, their kids were getting sick, alarm bells should have gone off. Not only should those alarm bells gone off, but the alarm bell should have sounded loud and clear. Something's wrong here. And so you would have a diverse voice sounding an alarm. But also, when you're sitting at a table and you're formulating policy and you're setting policy, and I gave examples of the great diversity in this country, as it relates to the water and wastewater treatment. I gave the example of Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb. But Thomas Edison was stumped when it came to the filament that goes inside the light bulb. And it was a black man who came with that invention, who had neither college education nor was he doing anything other than trying to embrace technology right after the Emancipation Proclamation. So the voices in the room bring value. I said to them this morning that in the wastewater industry, 2 out of every 3 persons is a male. In the wastewater industry, almost 8 out of 10 people are white. That is not diversity.
It's not a reflection of the community.
It is not a reflection of the community. It's not a reflection of our best values. And I submit it's not a reflection of the best talent. And what we want is the best talent in the public sector, in the private sector, because I shared with them a statistic that of the Fortune 500 corporations in America, Fortune 500 corporations, 40% of them are headed by immigrants, relatives of immigrants. And we know about Steve Jobs and other people.
Sure.
So diversity brings a tremendous amount of resources to not just conversation, but to inventions, innovation, and obviously consumers.
How does an industry like the water sector end up in a situation where they have, such skewed numbers with diversity, with such a male-dominated workforce, such a white-dominated workforce? How does it get to that
Well,
point?
I tell people a lot. I use a metaphor. If you keep fishing in the same pond, you're going to get what you've always gotten. If a vacancy comes up and you have to go to your country club, your health club, or whoever you go play golf with, or whoever you go drinking with, you're probably going to be reflective of the people that you hang out with. And so 2 things happen. You don't get the best talent. You begin to get an echo chamber, people who are going to agree with whatever you say. And especially when it comes to women and minorities. And I think I gave a statistic, I forget if it was J.D. Powell or which statistic it came from, that in those corporations where they'd seen an increase in diverse gender, they saw a 15% increase in return on investments, ROI. In those instances where you had a diverse workforce based on race and ethnicity, you saw a 40% increase in profitability.
Wow, that's significant.
So you're selling equipment to the wastewater treatment facility. You might want to consider going and finding some people in your sales force.
Sure.
Particularly when you come somewhere like the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District here in Chicago, when the president, as you know, is an African-American female, when the person who signs the check on the finance committee is a Hispanic male, or the person who is in charge of diversity and inclusion is an African-American woman. And that's just in Cook County, Chicago. You can multiply that 5 or 6 times in Atlanta, in New York, in California, Los Angeles, San Diego, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee. It just doesn't make any sense in the 21st century not to be diverse and inclusive.
So the hindrances to increasing diversity and inclusion, you hit on some of them, fishing in that same pond for folks. Maybe the people out there that are looking for jobs don't see themselves in that utility or at that company. They don't see a reflection of themselves. Those are some hindrances to increasing diversity. Are there others that
well, this
should be
morning I spent
broken down?
considerable time on what I call unconscious bias.
Yes.
Unconscious bias. I mean, sometimes people just don't give enough thought to the way they think and the way they operate their programs and run their programs and recruit and train. They don't spend enough time in training sessions to see and take a look in the mirror. Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. They don't look in the mirror and see what's wrong with them because they are unconsciously biased. Now, there is overt racism and bias in this country. We know that. But the majority of the hindrances, I believe, are not physical barriers. They're not physical barriers. They are psychological barriers. And we must overcome them.
We've heard the term unconscious bias a lot more in this workforce and diversity conversation. So I think we're hopeful that just by talking about that will get people to look in the mirror, like you said. And self-examination, trainings. What are some other ways to try to expose and deal with that unconscious bias?
I think you're going to be forced to look at it, particularly when it comes to public sector, because you're getting people in policy-making positions, people in positions of authority, making policy decisions. Many of them look like me. Many of them are female. Many of them are Indian Americans and Hispanic Americans. And they are going to demand that as a part of your annual review, that you begin to bring a diverse workforce to bear.
Sure. What other practical advice would you give to the water sector as it's really trying to address this issue? And it is talking about workforce, it's talking about diversity, it's talking about inclusion. It doesn't just want to talk about it, okay? Folks are really trying to look for ways to change this and to change those numbers.
I think that this conference has taken the first step by having not only this web chat, not only having me come and speak to an audience, not only having someone like the president of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District come and speak to the opening ceremony, that people can see, touch, and smell, and see what it is that they should begin to look like. But I think the critical part to this is a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. Water Environmental Federation has taken that first step. The conference should never be the same. There should never be another WEFTEC. There should never be another 92 years of exhibiting conferences where you don't have extreme diversity from both geographically and ethnically and racially, professionally. And people who come to this conference come from all over the world. And so we know that the only planet we have is one we live on.
That's it.
And the people involved in providing the most precious resource other than oxygen and air, which they don't produce, even though we pollute it,
we do.
is water. And many have said that the next global war, World War III, will be fought over water. So the professionals that are assembled here at this conference have a profound responsibility and obligation to be able to lodge and engage the next generation. Somebody said, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, you're already 20 years too late. So WEFTEC, Water Environmental Federation, ASCE are taking steps to catch up. I don't mean catch up with the NBA and the NFL, but to catch up as professionals in an industry that is vital to this planet.
Catch up with the diversity of our communities and the U.S. population.
That is correct.
Absolutely. I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about your partnership with Chicago MWRD and how that has developed and what the results of that have been.
I have had over 40 years of experience with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. I was working with them before they had affirmative action requirements and goals and objectives. Some of my friends have been past presidents of the Water Reclamation of Greater Chicago. I have commissioners now who are dear friends of mine at the Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. The function that has been so pivotal to our relationship has been my position as president of the U.S. Minority Contractors Association, which represents minority contractors, subcontractors, architects, engineers, any of the professionals in the construction industry. And so I've helped them shape policy, set goals, so that we can bring to bear the extreme diversity here in the metropolitan area of Chicago, state of Illinois. They have accepted those. They have given it substance. They've given teeth to their regulations and policies to the point that we have seen tremendous growth in persons who do business with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District.
Sure.
They realize also, because of my background in the legislature, and I served in the House of Representatives, they had an ally and a friend when I was in the House of Representatives. But from time to time, they do go before governmental bodies, seeking a tax increase, seeking other kinds of things. And it helps to have an association who can come and stand alongside them, give voice to what it is they're trying to advance in the legislature, before the county board, or at Chicago City Hall. It just helps to have allies.
Sure.
And we've been a very good ally, and they have been a very good partner with the U.S. minority contractors.
It sounds like the work you've done, that partnership, some of the processes and things you've set in place could be good templates for other utilities around the country as ways that they can work to increase diversity and better reflecting their communities.
Well, I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
And we are a national organization with chapters in Georgia, getting ready to open up a chapter in Indiana. So we look forward to working with any partners. And now that we've developed this strategic relationship with the Water Environmental Federation and what it is you all do, and I had a great conversation with Todd today, who is the utility section person, and Susan, who is your lobbyist, and this year's president, Tom Knutz, who's from the Water Reclamation District. And then I understand next year you all have a female president.
That's right.
There's your diversity.
She takes over this evening.
Yeah, there's your diversity.
Yeah.
So I hope that we have the opportunity, I and my officers and members of my division. I have one of my members sitting here now who heads up the Architecture, Engineering, and Information Technology Division, Chetan Kale, whose father is Indian American from India, and heads up the WEFTEC division in India. So I'm hoping that we can help you all beyond the shores of the United States.
That sounds great. That's one of our big missions is to take what we learn and what's happening one place and share it with others so that it can be implemented in other places. So very terrific conversation, great perspective. I value your time, and thank you so much for sharing it.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
I look forward to us chatting again.
Absolutely. Thank you all for watching. For more interviews, visit weftec.org/now.